Hello everyone, I'm Nathan with the Community Library Network, and I'd like to welcome you to the 4th video in the 2020 Teen Summer Writing Series. How was it writing that first draft? There were likely some of you who were really excited to see it hit the page, and some of you who were more apprehensive than you were excited. Whichever camp you fall into, now is the time that you begin to take what you have and craft it into what it will become, a finished piece that gets published. To help you through that process, we have a lot to cover this week, so let's get started. Last week, I alluded to making an outline between your first and second drafts. I talked about how going for it on the first draft is going to help you in crafting the pathos, or the emotional response in your work. This week, we need to look at rounding out the ethos and the logos. Ethos is the ethical appeal to what you write, how your reader views your credibility as a writer, or the credibility of your narrator. If your narrator doesn't communicate a sense of authority about what you're talking about, your topic is going to have less of an impact on your reader. Therefore, particularly in nonfiction, even in creative nonfiction, ethos is important. Logos is the logic and reason behind what you write. If your piece isn't making sense to your reader, if your claims are far-fetched and unbelievable, you have to think about how you are crafting this information so that your reader can follow it and accept it. When you write, you're creating a stew with ethos, pathos, and logos as primary ingredients. So how can we objectively think about each of these things and how they play with each other? That's where the outline comes in. On page 53 of the workbook, there's an example of an outline based on the first draft example of An Uncurated Life. If you still don't have a copy of the workbook, there's a link in the video description for you to download one, or you can pick up a printed copy at the Post Falls Library. If we look at that example outline, we can start figuring out which parts of it fit into the primary ingredients of our stew. Grandma Hanson died. When we look at that fact, what categories does it fit into? Ethos, pathos, or logos? If you read the first paragraph of that first draft, you most likely think that it's a blend. Maybe it had you thinking about how you would feel or did feel when or if your grandparents passed. The very fact that she died connotes an emotional response or pathos. But then as a writer, I chose to counteract the pathos by stating we weren't close. And then I provided some reasons why. Maybe this shifts it from a primarily emotional response into a logical one for you, meaning that we've moved into logos. As we look at writing creative nonfiction, leveraging expectations like this can be an effective way to keep our readers engaged. It's not unlike a plot twist in fiction. We're setting up our reader to think one thing, and then we shift it to another. Outlining your work helps you to think about things like this and see what you've left out that you shouldn't have. It can also help you to understand what should be taken out. When I make an outline like this, I take it one paragraph at a time. I outline each paragraph as I wrote it in the first draft, and then I look at them and think about what I'm trying to craft as a writer. Let's look at that opening paragraph again. I liked the juxtaposition of the pathos and logos that was in the paragraph. That was something that I wanted to keep in subsequent drafts. If you look at the second draft, that first paragraph has been reduced, but the opening two sentences are pretty much the same. By the time I got into the final draft, Grandpa made an appearance, and the two sentences were combined with a different punctuation, an M dash, but I still made a shift from pathos to logos. In fact, by the final draft, I doubled down on that shift in the first paragraph and positioned Grandma as a curator who crafted a facade. I think about each paragraph in the piece in turn. Sometimes paragraphs are in the wrong order. Remember that the nature of first drafts is to create a mess. You're just getting your thoughts down so that you can work with them. In the example of a first draft, there's a paragraph about Grandma being the product of the Great Depression about 2/3 of the way through the draft. Outlining the draft helped me to recognize that that paragraph needs to be closer to the beginning because it helps the reader more fully understand Grandma's motivations, particularly when they pertain to keeping things. The outline will help you to recognize issues with the order that you're presenting things. Sometimes there are things that you forget to include. When I was thinking about this as a braided story structure, exploring racism and the hoarding of stuff, a structure that I eventually abandoned by the third draft, I left out the part about my grandpa fighting in Korea. A tidbit that helped to shape her notions of what was acceptable behavior. For the racism side of the story, this may seem an overly simple assertion, but it was important. There are 3 pages for you to outline your first draft in the workbook. Take each paragraph of your draft and start breaking them down into important pieces. Once you have the full thing broken down, think about the ingredients each section is made up of. Are they ingredients of emotion, of logic, or of ethical appeal? Hopefully you find you've got a pretty good blend, because that's part of what makes a good story. If you think you're lacking in a particular ingredient, you can add it in the second draft. Did you need to insert some facts or change their order? Are there parts that just don't belong? Doing an outline is going to help you recognize those too. After your outline, but before your second draft, there's some things that you need to make sure that you fully understand about what you're writing. If you're following along, that's going to be the stuff around page 57 in the workbook. First, who is your audience? If you're writing for yourself and only yourself, your writing is going to be pretty boring to other readers. Part of what gives you joy as a writer is sharing your work with others. And really, that's the point of the Teen Summer Writing Program, to provide you a platform to share your work. Thinking about who your audience is can have a big effect on how your piece is received by your reader. When you read James Baldwin's essay, did you feel like it was an intimate look into his and his community's plight? Did you feel their oppression? That intimate feel is by design. Baldwin crafted that essay as a letter to a single person, creating that intimacy for his readers. In comparison, Twain's example of travel writing is less intimate. It takes a broader perspective because he had a broader audience. Next, what is your voice? You've probably started to see a unique voice present itself as you write. You can choose to embrace that voice or change it into something different to have a different effect on your reader. If you tackle writing about your topic irreverently, you're going to have a much different effect than if you approach it respectfully. Are you doing a hard-hitting look at the truth or a piece of satire? Each is as valid as the other, but they have different effects on the reader. Spending a few moments to consider what your voice is important. What are your goals? As a writer, you should have a goal for your reader. Do you want your reader to cry? Do you want them to question their own actions? Do you want them to rise to action? How about laugh? We write for a reason, one that is often deeper than just wanting to be heard. Understanding your goal is going to help you to provide direction, and that direction is going to help you effectively craft your piece. What tense should you write in? That may be a new question for some of you, but it's an important one. Without splitting too many hairs, there's two basic tenses for you to consider: present and past. Future tense hasn't happened yet, so that's going to be tough to use in creative nonfiction. Present tense provides immediacy. It highlights action very well. Past tense creates a feeling of reflection and can allow your narrator the opportunity to interject their interpretations. Speaking of narrators, who's yours? When you wrote your first draft, you did it with a narrator in mind. Was it the right one? Remember that all stories have multiple perspectives. Telling your story from a different perspective can make a profound difference in what the story becomes. Take the story I'm using to take you through the differences in first, second, and final drafts as an example. How much different would this story be if I told it from my dad's perspective instead of mine? That scene with him waving the yardstick would have a different connotation. The perspectives on accepting racism from older generations would be different. The hoarding of stuff would be looked at differently as well. Ultimately, it would be a different story on the same topic, told from a different perspective. It wouldn't hold any less truth, but the emphasis would be framed differently and the meaning would change. You also need to consider what point of view you're telling your story in. What it boils down to is, are you going to write in first, second, or third person? There's some subsections of those as well, but for a basic understanding, those are the three. First person is where your narrator is telling what happened to them. This is how we normally speak. There are a lot of I's. I did this. I said that. You get the idea. This tense can help you to create intimacy. Second person isn't used very often anymore. In fact, if you want to have a dated feel, you can accomplish that by using second person point of view. It's like the Choose Your Own Adventure book series. There are a lot of yous. You did this. You said that. This tense creates impersonal distance. Third person is perhaps the most familiar. It's the one that we read most often. It's full of a lot of theys. They did this. They said that. It could also be he's, she's, or other pronouns outside of the I. There are some spaces in the workbook for you to address all of these things around page 58. So what should you be focusing on this week? Outline that first draft, think about what you've written and how you can make it better, and then write your second draft thinking about those questions that you answered on page 58. Next Wednesday's video is going to cover how to prepare for a critique and how to give one. If you're coming to the peer review workshop at the Post Falls Library at 3 o'clock, please try to watch the video before you come. It's going to drop at about 10 a.m. That workshop does require signing up because space is limited, so call 773-1506 to reserve your spot. Have fun crafting your second draft, and until next Wednesday, happy writing.